Hello, everyone. Well, as you can probably tell, there have been a few little technological gremlins. I blame it on the wind. It's probably much more complicated than that, but I hope that you can all hear me all right. Our guest is going to join us by phone as her comms are down on her computer, but we'll make it work somehow. Talking of our guest today, she would describe herself as an artist and traveler who's made these occupations her career, more recently adding to her job title that of, in her words, glorified trucker. Well, mistress of the understatement, RoseCecil is so much more than that. We are today in the privileged company of a woman who, more accurately speaking, is in the business of saving lives. A globe-trotting, Harley-Davidson riding artist she might be, but she is also a heroine. Not one for sitting on the sofa at home watching the news in abject horror. Rose is a woman of action. As a major driving force for Mission Ukraine UK, she works as a volunteer sourcing and then converting four-wheel drives into ambulances before driving them herself, along with boats and ribs, all the way out to the Ukraine and often into combat zones. She is risking her own life to help others. And that, to me, defines being a heroine. And she ain't no boring goody two shoes heroine either. 6 foot tall, 67, can I mention that, Rose? Year old glamazon of noble descent with a funky coloured mohawk and a passion for motorbiking. She's also, above all, a friend whom I hold in ever increasing esteem. So I can also reliably inform you that she is wickedly witty with a healthy sense of the ridiculous, trips over a lot, sober, it's dyspraxia, yet still wears towering block heels and is refreshingly rebellious. As an artist, her paintbrushes have been her passport to travel and adventure, as well as making some extraordinary long journeys on a huge motorbike. She embodies feminine strength. One moment astride that big motorbike, the next parked up, paintbrush to hand, demurely painting the scenery. She's also an intriguing paradox. You might encounter her in the pages of a glossy, as glamorous and authoritative front of house at the exclusive Mayfair restaurant La Maison Française. Turn a page and she's in a Ukrainian ditch with some burly soldiers. Certainly, Rose is the embodiment of how to live life to its utmost. And as we talk to her today, I hope that you all also will see what I see in my friend. Goes at life full throttle and has consequently achieved a deep sense of fulfillment, something all of us here today thrive for, but so often eludes us. It's possibly because, as her story will demonstrate to us today, it takes guts, moral fiber, and a driving sense of standing up for what you believe in. And by standing up, I don't just mean with words, but action. So enough of my words. Let's meet my guest and be inspired by her. I'm delighted to introduce you all to RoseCecil. Hello, Rose.
Hi, Rosie. Gosh, what an introduction. Right.
It was a bit long, wasn't it? But there's an awful lot to say about you. I mean, you are so sort of multi-dimensional. I couldn't stop. Now, the first thing, Rose, it's very important. Where are we speaking to you now?
Well, it's hilarious. I am in South London, but we've had more communication connecting today than if I was in Ukraine. So I just think,
Well, yes, but at least you're somewhere safe, warm and dry, and even if it's not raining missiles, it might be raining cats and dogs, but it's a great relief to us all to know that, because we were half expecting to have to interview in, I don't know, Ukrainian ditch somewhere. But also, you know, because you've been, well, relatively speaking, commuting between here and Ukraine, we are at this side of things kept relatively well informed by the press and media, or so we think. And certainly recently, there's been some fairly raw documentaries about what's going on in Ukraine. So it just adds to the respect which we all hold for you, for the courage that the work that you're doing undertakes. And it's an immense privilege to have you here today, and to hear from someone like you who's basically been right out there in the center of it all. And because you sort of represent to the audience today and myself, you know, what we strive to realize ourselves, that sense of fulfillment, I'm going to start by quoting back at you, if I may, some words you said to me in one of your messages to me. Quote, and Ben, we can bring up this slide because it illustrates it. I can't believe how alive I feel. I think this is the most rewarding part of my life, to think that I'm part of something that is making a difference. I mean, you look so at one with yourself there, but there's a lot to unravel, or should we say unpack, from that suitcase you're sitting on, or rucksack, because your work for Mission Ukraine is emotionally pummeling and physically very dangerous, and yet you say it's the most fulfilling time of your life. How so?
yes, why is it fulfilling? I think it's because I have a sense that the little that I do is actually contributing to saving lives. And I don't think I've ever been able to say that before in my life, that the work I do actually does do that. So delivering a 4x4 ambulance to frontline medics who will use it to casevac the wounded from the edge zone to the stabilization unit. It cuts down the time that those wounded people are lying waiting for help, and could be the difference between life and death. And the same with the boats we supply. Without those boats, the wounded would lie on the other side of the river and not be rescued and get to help. So yes, it feels very immediate when I meet the men and women who are these incredibly brave medics, that I can bring them something that will help them do their job effectively. That means a huge amount. And I think that's why I feel I'm doing something important.
You're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And yet, um, normally all our past paves the way towards our present situation, and therefore it would be good to explore ourselves how you reach this remarkable juncture in life with such sort of absolute conviction of purpose and such courage. So logically enough, I thought in preparing this, we will start at your family roots, if we may, to find some clues. And I think that our audience will find it actually quite surprising as to your beginnings, as it were. Can you tell us a little bit about your family background? Because some people might recognize your family name as being instantly recognizable as a historically one of the most influential families in history?
So I was born and brought up in Dorset in the West Country, but my family, the Cecils, are a very political family, and that all started back in the 16th century when my William Cecil, Lord Burghley, became Secretary of State to Queen Elizabeth I and really continued for the next 40 years as her chief advisor and ally, and helped her stay on the throne and keep Britain peaceful, even with the ever constant threat of the Spanish and their armada. And his son also became advisor to Queen Elizabeth, and then advisor and helped the smooth accession of James to the throne. So
actually quite remarkable for that time, his longevity in that position, which shows something that I think that you have also, Rose, because, you know, knowing you, you do have a very keen sense of judgment and balancing situations. Also, I mean, we have here so people can conjure up the extraordinary paradoxical aspect of this. Ben, if you can bring up the family seat, or many of you will know it, you might have been there. Hatfield has, although I think you began your very early years in Cranbourne Manor, and then moved into Hatfield. I don't know, but what a childhood dream to race around playing an impossible hide and seek amongst the suits of armor and the secret doors and goodness knows what. Was it a dream childhood?
and my grandparents lived there until my grandfather died when I was 15, and we used to go and spend long periods of time as children there, and we absolutely adored it. We used to roller skate around the armory in the Marble Hall playing he, and we also used to tease, I'm afraid, the members of the public during the house by making ghost noises and things like that, which we thought hilarious, but must have been very tiresome for everybody else.
I don't know. I think it probably pushed up the ticket sales, didn't it?
But
I think there's a certain irony in that description you've just given us, because you're talking about hurtling around on a couple of wheels with a bunch of blokes, because you were all brothers, you had your siblings. So you later in life, you do exactly the same thing in all male packs of motorbikers, yes?
Well, I guess so. They did. The early training must have paid off, because I had 5 brothers, and they used to say things like, I really think it's time she learnt to ride a bicycle. So they would take me and the bicycle to the top of the hill and push me off to it. And, you know, I would land in a pile of nettles or whatever it was. Or they did complain. They said I cried a lot, but that might have been because they did that. Or they would push me up trees and leave me, because that was their way of saying, they said, if we put her up there, she'll have to find her own way down, and that way she'll learn to climb trees. Such a useful skill.
Well, I have to say that you were doing the best possible training course for your future pastimes. I mean, a lot of people pay a lot of money with personal trainers for that sort of stuff. And anyway, courage and pluck was in your genes, because there are some remarkable stories of, well, nothing short of heroism for both your father and your mother, yeah? Your father in the war and your mother with regards to Poland.
Absolutely. My dad was, yes, he was a soldier and had a very active war and was did. And my mother, at the time of Solidarity, was so horrified by the lack of support that the Poles were having. She said they dropped everything and came and helped us in our hour of need in the war, all those Polish pilots. Now it's our turn to do something. And she felt that the British government, British people were not doing enough. So she browbeat all her friends and connections into helping her. And she took endless succession of food, medical supplies. She once took an entire operating theatre out to Poland. Obviously, now Poland is a rich and successful country, but it did have a wobble at that time and did need help. And she worked her socks off to help them.
History repeats itself, Rose, because you're playing very much a similar role for the Ukraine, and let's hope that the Ukraine, like Poland, reincarnates back to something as it was before in terms of reinstating itself. And having parents like that must have been quite a strong influence in your life. I mean, you clearly weren't shunted off onto the predictable path of some of your contemporaries, i.e. the Deb circuit. I mean, you're hardly sort of pearls and twin set, if you don't mind my saying so. And I sense now that maybe your mother was a very positive influence in affording you the freedom to follow your heart, which you did, and you went to art school. Well, actually, you went to art schools. So I think that that's quite interesting, and also your to express yourself. I mean, you might visually seem to be a paradox. Like here we have the biker, and the next shot, Ben, if you can bring up, here we are, glamour, impossibly glamorous in South America, we would guess. And I think actually, if we look closely at this picture, that necklace that you're wearing, did you design that yourself?
I didn't actually. That was a friend of mine who makes amazing festival wear. But I did spend 10 years with my own small jewelry company, which I was the designer, maker, and seller of things. And it was a kind of stage in my career as an artist. And it was also because I was a single mum with 2 small children and needed to support us. So it was a kind of dual purpose thing, and a wonderful 10 years. I really enjoyed it, and I learned so much, and I learned a lot about human nature, because when you're out there meeting people and selling your work and having to work quite hard, actually, design fairs and dealing with your clients and all of that, you learn a great deal about human nature, and I'm very grateful for those 10 years.
Yes, well, I remember that time. I think we met somewhere towards the end of it, when I still have a pair of your earrings, which I treasure, by the way. I should have worn them today, shouldn't I? But one needs repairing. I might send it to you, rose quartz. And I think you used a lot of silver and tin from Cornwall where you were living. But your I think it's called multimedia art was actually, I know you won't say it yourself, but it was a triumph. It was very successful. And here we have, well, yet more pages of a glossy. You in, I think it's Harper's and Queen, a private viewing of one of your launches of Atchley's painting, and all the great and the good attended. And more to the point, with your saying, you had to make a living out of this. You did very well in selling your art as well. So it was all very important, because whilst you managed to, as you said, bring up your family by working hard with your art talents, it was also your passport, really, wasn't it, into the world of travel and expeditions, many of which in that particular phase, you took your family as well, you took your children. I remember being in huge admiration of that.
I did. We did do that. I I suppose as a child, our house was filled with adventurers, and they were often people that my parents knew from the war, fought with the partisans, or they were unconventional people, you might say, great travelers and continued to be great travelers, people like Fitzroy MacLean and other, I guess you'd call them war heroes. So they were our normality. And my brothers were very adventurous, and two of them went on to become war correspondents. So we were used to the idea that travel was normal, and that going to perhaps more normal package holidays was not really very interesting. That's what I was brought up to think. Although sometimes these days I think how nice it would be.
I know. I dream too, Rose. Wouldn't it be nice just to sit in a hammock with a cocktail for a change?
And so what happened when me and the kids were on our own, I thought there's not much I can do for them really, because I'm not one of those sort of super mums who seems to be able to organize everything. But what I do know about is travel. And so what I wanted to share with them was the possibility that if they ever dreamt of going anywhere, it wasn't that difficult to do. What you had to do was open the front door and go through it and go there, because, you know.
Yes, I absolutely agree, because people are often daunted by the unknown. But it's a question of getting to know the unknown. And as you say, if you can step through the doorway outside, step over that crevasse, as it were, you're already on your way. And one doesn't start off immediately as an expert. One starts off as a sort of bumbling amateur. And it's part of that journey to learn as you go.
Well, we went all sorts of places. We started quite ambitious, which is we went to Tonga when Dolly was 7, I think 6 or 7, and my son Valentine was probably about 9 or so. And that was a terrific adventure. We ended up being very close spectators to the last king's coronation, and we're able to take part in all the celebrations around the various parts of the archipelago. So that was an extraordinary experience. And then we followed it up with adventures in Kazakhstan and Transylvania. We went and worked as volunteers on an elephant and rhino sanctuary in Zimbabwe called Imiri, which does incredible work. And, I sometimes look back at the photographs of the children with these wonderful elephants and rhinos, and just think how lucky we are, because we don't know whether there will be elephants or rhinos. Children's children grow up.
It's the best form of education often lies outside of the school classroom. And I think that your message there is so important, to encourage people to, having a family doesn't have to corset your sense of adventure. Just take them with you. It's the best possible experiences that you can share together. And I think it was probably slightly after bringing your children up, I'm not sure, Rose, when you started your really epic motorbiking journeys. And I think it's worth just briefly at least bringing both of these in before we move to the Ukraine, because they were all indirectly part of that pathway towards your current sort of destination. So now I hope I've got this one right, but I think this is the first one, which is called the White Knight's Ride.
Yes. So I have a lovely friend called Nicholas Fairfax, And I got a call out of the blue one day. I knew Nick, but not very well. But he rang me and he said, do you want to ride a motorcycle across Russia? Well, I didn't pause. And I said, absolutely, yes. When are we leaving? And that was the start of a really great adventure. And I'm proud to say that we raised around $800,000 for various charities. And we kind of changed the idea of charity in Russia. I don't know what's happening now because obviously everything is different now. But in those days, there was a kind of modicum of freedom. But charity had a very bad name. And it was really a fundraising exercise by individuals who would start a charity. And it was basically a way of raising money for themselves. And everyone we met from when we first started our ride said, why are you doing this? We all know what happens to the money, and it won't go to the actual charities. And we proved them wrong. We worked through the Charities Aid Foundation Russia, and we verified and made sure that all our money did go to the orphanage and for life-saving operations and to save the tigers out in the east. So we really felt as though we achieved something.
Yes, that is an achievement, Rose. I know, because speaking from personal experience of having lived in Eastern Europe, in the Czech Republic, they're not inclined towards charity. But in large because they've been busy sort of fighting for their own survival over the decades. But also, as you said, I think it's an inherent distrust of where the money's going to end up, probably quite rightly so. So that was quite remarkable. And funny enough, when I too was doing an expedition in Russia, we helped set up Veterans Aid ironically, in Russia through the then ambassador Laurie Bristow. So Laurie Bristow. So that's a positive coincidence there. But another interesting aspect, very briefly, of that expedition was I was curious because you actually turned out to be the only female member of how many bikers were there? 8, 9?
Yeah, we fluctuated between 7 and 8, and we had a couple of Russian riders with us, but we were various nationalities, predominantly English. And we did try and find other women, but they all fell by the wayside. And funnily enough, later on, we had the same kind of outcome, which is women seem less confident about their abilities, and they, in spite of the fact that they're often better riders than men, they don't always believe that they're capable of doing stuff. Whereas I'm afraid I know that I'm incapable. I'm not very good at it, but I want to do it so badly that I just pretend I can do it.
I think that could be said for a lot of things in life, isn't it? That we all pretend.
Rosie, who is superlatively good at those amazing expedition skills. Mine is entirely bluff.
Well, I don't know about that, but what does concern me is any sort of dyspraxic foibles, whether you have lots of tumbles off your bike. And you did as well, didn't you? You actually had a potentially quite serious one. Ooh.
So quite often in Russia, we had police escort, whether we wanted them or not, often through the bigger towns, Novosibirsk or whatever it was. And this time we were traveling in very bad weather between Moscow and St. Petersburg. And for various reasons, the police car slammed on their brakes, and a lorry in the queue behind the oncoming cars stopped, skidded, locked up, and came towards us, driving towards them in single file. So they missed the first two riders. And there was a very nasty moment where I realized, you know, that thing where you're going down a single track road, like a double, cars one way, only direction. And there's very large lorries passing you in the opposite direction. Your assumption all your life is they're going to stay in their lane, isn't it? Well, in this case, I suddenly realized that the lorry coming towards me was actually not just coming towards me, but was going to hit me. And I had this momentary realization that either it was going to hurt a great deal or I was going to die. And that's the last coherent thought I had. I luckily had the presence of mind to move my leg, and the lorry hit me just behind my leg. And the next thing I knew, I was traveling at high speed on my back, head first down the road for quite a long way. And very remarkably, I suddenly realized I was A, still alive, and B, as I got to my feet rather gingerly, that I was uninjured. Well, I mean, there were some consequences, but, there was no leaking or anything like that. So I ran back, and my poor boss, Nick, had actually been knocked off as well, and his bike was pretty much totaled. In fact, it was. So that was a bit of a damper on the expedition, but I rode on the back. One of our team members, Kevin Sanders, who is a world Guinness record holder for the quickest circumnavigation of the globe on a motorcycle, and luckily he was happy to take me pillion until my bike could be repaired. And so I just hopped on the back of his, and Nick had to spend a couple of days recovering. And in St. Petersburg or somewhere next town, I think, my bike was repaired. So there was a kind of happy ending to it, but it took away that feeling of invincibility that after whatever it was, riding across Russia, you kind of felt you'd seen and done everything, but it turned out that wasn't so.
I think that, first of all, well, thank heavens you were all right. And obviously you were destined to go on to do other work in this instance, but also saluting all the more your courage for what you continued to do because of losing that wonderful thing one has in younger days of invincibility, which makes you less cavalier. But there is something else that I wanted to ask you about with regards to this particular journey relevant to Ukraine, which is how did you find the Russians that you met and you biked with for a while, etc.? How did you find them?
I absolutely loved them. I was very lucky because some of the English guys kind of stuck together, and at the end of the day's riding, they hung out in their own. They hung out in their own little groups, but I made friends with some of our, as it were, wagon train, and they kindly took me along to stay with their Russian friends along the way. So I got to stay with families right the way across Russia. Not every time, because sometimes we'd have to camp or stay in roadside. We stayed in really terrible places. But I actually did get to meet real Russian people, and my goodness, they know how to party, don't they? So
Yes, they certainly do. And actually, probably like you, I meeting the real Russian people. It's worth bringing this into the frame. I always remember them saying, "Please don't judge us as you might our politicians." And you know what remarkably good fun and how nice they were, even even when they were drunk. Now, Rose, um, we've got to sort of we've got to mention your next biking venture, but I because of what you learned from it is relevant again to Ukraine. But we'll sort of gallop through it so that we can get to the Ukraine. We have here a picture of the I think the team of your bikers for your extraordinary long epic from Bangkok to Tbilisi, and I don't know what Joe Biden's doing in there. Is that who is it's you unmistakably this time with blue hair, but it was just four of you, wasn't it? I think.
Well, no, we were five, and actually, this is from another trip I did. It was amazing Harley Davidson rally I did in the United States over in the East Coast, which was fantastic. The Fairfax ride. So the band of bikers was a motorcycle journey from Bangkok in Thailand to Tbilisi in Georgia. It took about 9 weeks, I think, 9 or 10 weeks, and there were five.
Miles is that?
What?
How many miles is that? Is it?
I think it's around 11,000 miles. We rather foolishly didn't actually clock at the beginning, but worked that out roughly.
Well, you did certainly go through some remarkable places, of course. And on our next picture, there's one of my favorite shots of you. Well, there's the route actually. That's not my favorite shot, but that gives you an idea of the that gives you an idea of the phenomenal distance, but also the interesting places that you pass through. And the next visual, I'm going to take a guess. If Ben, you can be there. We are. Is that the Karakorum Highway?
It is.
I got it right. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Is a pun, and you again look incredibly happy. You're doing what you love. You're doing an adventure, and you're doing it for a good cause. What was the cause?
So we were raising money for ActionAid, which is an organization that aims to help women and girls in countries where perhaps they don't get the support they need. And it also works with men as well, but it's predominantly to educate the men about why women and girls need to be supported, and also maybe talk about equality and about valuing women and girls. So it's a wonderful charity, and they do fantastic work, and they work with education, healthcare, all sorts, and they were a lovely organization to work with.
Well, for all the adventures that you had, and I think the next picture hints at, you came a cropper once or twice on this journey as well, suggests it anyway, biting the dust there, Rose. But also you encountered some of the uglier political arenas, and just briefly before we move to the Ukraine, it's of interest to me, having been there myself and having taken very much to the Uyghurs. You biked around the southern side of the Taklamakan Desert, where all the Uyghurs were or had been. And because you were doing this, I think in 2018, I should think most of them were no longer in evidence. Was that right?
I think what I found incredibly upsetting and distressing was I had spent a long time in Xinjiang in 1990, 1991. So I spent about 8 months in China during that time, of which probably 5 or 6 were either in Xinjiang or around the edges of or inside Tibet. And I grew to really love the Uyghur people. Obviously, I love the Tibetans, and I admired their culture. I admired their bravery and courage. And these are an interesting and amazing people, and it's their land. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It's been theirs for a long, long time. And we were already beginning to see then the start of repression. But when I went back in 2018, I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I felt heartbroken by what I saw. I think perhaps the worst place I've ever been in my life. The absence of hope, the complete absence of freedom. It's on a scale, when I mention it to people here, they go, "Oh, we don't have any freedom. We are always being watched." And I feel like saying, you have no idea what it's like in Xinjiang. The level of surveillance, the fact that local people, Uyghurs, have Han spies sent to live with them, that every single movement they made is observed either through cameras in their homes or through their phones.
If indeed they still have their homes. I know that once all the men and the boys were moved into educational camps, Han Chinese were then moved into the homesteads with the women. I mean, it's nothing short of cultural genocide on every scale, and I can't help but feel that there's a relief over there from the Chinese that actually all eyes are focused at the moment on Ukraine and the Middle East. But anyway, moving on from that, Ukraine.
Yes.
Now, when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and whilst I think that the world was still actually coming to realize that this was not a 24-hour news item, you were actually pretty fast off the mark, because Mission Ukraine was setting itself up. And how did you get to hear about them? I mean, how did you get involved?
Like most things in my life, it all be by chance. So my niece was very actively helping settle Ukrainian refugees in the West Country, and having saturated everywhere around where she lives, she decided to start raising money for generators for recently liberated villages, and also places where the Russians had destroyed the energy infrastructure at the start of the winter in 2022. And so I sent her some paltry contribution and said, as one does, if you ever need any more help or a driver, here I am. And usually you never hear another thing. But 3 days later, I was driving out in a 4x4 to Ukraine. And once you get there, my experience is it's very unusual if you don't then commit, because what you see there and the people you meet means that you can't disengage.
And so your first journey out there, first of all, how long does it take actually? You likely say you went out there, but it's a good distance.
Yes, I went with a man who drove day and night, and so it took us it took us about 3 days, I think, to get over the border, and then he home and I went on. And I then joined up with local volunteers, and delivered we delivered the generators to various villages that most of them had only been liberated from the Russian occupation for about a month. So we were there very soon after the Russian occupation, and that enabled me to see the reality of you can expect from Russian occupation and the way they treat the Ukrainians, which is probably why they continue to fight.
Well, fortunately, you had a lot of sort of skill sets that you went out with to probably deal with some of the situations that you encountered, not least of all being an able mechanic, I imagine, but also you'd taken some fairly advanced medical courses, or did that come later after you got back and realized that you probably needed them?
Yeah, that I've gradually started trying to qualify myself and keep learning, and that will be something I will need to do, just keep training and retraining. And I must disabuse you of the fact that I'm an able mechanic. Unlike you, Rosie, who can look at yourself and wrangle sledges in the Arctic, I am utterly hopeless as a mechanic. I've had multiple lessons, still incapable. And like most things in life, I just bluff my way through. So
I thought that you'd swapped your silver teaspoon when you were brought up for a spanner, but clearly not. More a question of batting the eyelashes.
the boat trailer fell apart on the way on the long journey, and I just saw some passing soldiers, and I said to them in my appalling Ukrainian, "Oh, please help me," and they did.
Well, actually, we've got a video along those lines, but before that one, we got a video of your how you convert the vehicles into ambulances. It's great video, Rose. Ben, can you load it?
Conversion in progress here for this car to be made into a 4x4 ambulance.
Well, Rose, I have to say that if you're driving one of those across, you don't need to look for somewhere to spend the night, do you? It's very impressive. And okay, how do you source these? They look like converted transits or four-wheel drives.
Yeah, so we buy secondhand, usually quite high mileage, but still excellent engines, 4x4s. And the thing that we mostly need is that when we strip out the back seats, we have at least 6 foot for a lying down casualty. So when they're converted, they can take 2 lying down casualties or 1 lying down and 4 sitting in extremis. And what they do is, because they're 4x4s, and obviously casualties happen anywhere along the front line, mostly away from a tarred road where conventional ambulances can retrieve them. These 4x4s can pick up casualties and take them to a stabilization unit where they can be stabilized enough to get them for the next run to a hospital for surgery or other treatment.
And of course, what you've actually been making further developments on are not just relying on the ambulances, these converted ambulances, to getting to those hard to access land areas, but also access via water. So we're talking here about boats and ribs, and lucky us, we've got a double billing of videos here. So we've actually got your video of collecting a boat from the station. It's quite funny. Ben, can you...
That went well.
Так вы пониже возьми на эти все, вон гранату сфотнуть, он и потянет. Что он сейчас отсюда? Я тоже думал пониже взять.
But it wasn't over. I've just been rescued by a man whose reward will be in heaven because he charged me £2 for must have been 40 minutes work recalibrating the trailer on which the very decrepit boat is sitting, an even more decrepit trailer. He even had to get out the big hammer, so that tells you something as well, and enlist the help of a friend. Anyway, what can I say? Ukrainian men, love them.
There you go, you see. Rose, I rest my case about who needs to be a qualified mechanic if you've got eyelashes like that. Ukrainian men. However, laughter aside, these boats, what concerns me is that, first of all, why is the need for them now so pressing? And that sometimes these delivery rendezvous points don't look in this urban setting especially safe.
So obviously you all know that the Ukrainians established bridgeheads on the other side, the eastern bank of the Dnipro River, which is huge. And the only way to resupply or to evacuate casualties by boat. The river's too wide, up to 1 kilometre, so there's no bridges at that near those places. So the attrition rate for these boats is very, very high. And so they need help and support. And that's where Mission Ukraine saw the opportunity to help.
But if you bring up that next slide, I don't know if that is, how do you pronounce it, Rose? Dnieper River.
Dnieper. The Anglicized version is the Dnieper, but I don't know, I've always called it the Dnieper or river. And it's like the lifeblood and the kind of almost like a kind of great umbilical cord that goes. So this is the most incredible boat commander friend of mine. She's absolutely.
Oh, she?
Yeah, the one on the left is a she, and she's one of the bravest women I've ever known. She crosses the Dnipro regularly with her guys, and they have to evacuate people. And she gave me this description because, we look at that, we see her in a boat and we think, oh, well, you must be a bit exposed to drones and artillery, which is true. But as you can probably see, they're all wearing plate carriers, the vest that you have to wear protection. And they weigh a great deal, I know, because I have one myself, and running around in them isn't really an option much. And she said, I hate crossing the river. And I looked at her and she said, just imagine if the artillery hits the rubber boat, it deflates very quickly, and I will go straight to the bottom, because she's wearing the equivalent of a massive anchor around her body. There will be no. And that really brought it home to me how important our work is, how important it is that we keep supplying them with those boats so that we can help them get their wounded out.
Can I ask you, Rose, this awful game of chicken, basically, crossing the river, can you take any consolation in the possible fact that the rib is made up, the inflation design is made up of compartments, rather like supposedly the Titanic, in terms of if there's a hit in one or maybe two areas, you've still got some others that might just help keep you afloat, even with your weighted vest?
Yeah, it depends very much on how accurate the fire is and also about the drone, where the drone hits them. And there are other measures that they can take to protect themselves. But one of them is to have a very fast engine. Have developed techniques to try and outfox the drones. But the Russians are very skillful now with their drones, and they have so many.
So one of the things that you need on your wish list for support over here are fast, powerful motors that are suitable and compatible with ribs.
Yes, absolutely. And we're a humanitarian organisation, so we can't get involved in military supply. But obviously what these guys need is drone jammers, and also they need night vision equipment for their vehicles, and for everything basically, because so much happens at night. But it's not just the boats. Somehow for me, being on water is incrementally worse. But I've driven from a forward position on the Eastern Front back towards, well, being outside actual artillery range. And you have to drive your 4x4, your evac vehicle, at well over 100 kilometers an hour over unmade roads to avoid drones.
Wow. But the Ukrainians themselves have drones as well. Aren't they particularly proud of their drones?
They are, and they are amazing. And one of the things that is so incredible about the Ukrainians is the way they're so inventive, and they can adapt so many different things. And I think if you're interested in defense, I think that Western powers have learned a great deal from the Ukrainians.
Presumably, or I like to think that the Ukrainians, that the Russian drones that they shoot down, they then recycle and send them back in the direction from which they came.
Absolutely.
Now,
Also,
Rose, if we
yeah.
move to the next picture, it's just because here we go. I was going to point out that isn't that a woman, but you've just pointed out the heroine who was in the last picture. Maybe this is the same lady, because I was going to say, was it of any remark at all when you first went out there, that the Ukrainians were met by this woman, you, a British woman, bringing them all these things? I mean, did they just accept it and treat you as an equal, or was it surprising for them?
I think there are so many incredibly brave Ukrainian women, either serving as soldiers, as snipers, as medics, paramedics. Many of them had absolutely no experience before the war at all. They worked in digital media, they worked, I don't know, as salespeople, they worked as anything, but definitely not military. One of the things that you realize when you go there, and I've never met it on any scale, is how much Ukrainians love their country and how much freedom and democracy that they're fighting to preserve. We don't understand it because we've never experienced it. And you often hear people talking about how we live in a fascist state. And again, I feel like saying, you have no idea. You have no idea.
Well, except perhaps that similar sort of passion and belief in standing up and defending what you believe is yours did come about after having suffered the dreadful times of the First World War. People then took up arms again for the Second World War, which I suppose is hard for this generation now to comprehend. I like to think it's
Yeah,
still
it's
in
true.
us. I like to think it's still in us. Whether it would be quite as courageous as the Ukrainians, I don't know. But one thing we Brits do have in common, you and me, a lot of British, but also with the Ukrainians, is a rather dark sense of humor. And you did actually, I think in the end, you got on very well with some of your Ukrainian mates. And we got a picture here of a classic one of you having a bit of a laugh. And
Yeah.
presumably, you know, that wonderful special bond you get when you share those type of times with people, you know, living on the edge.
Yeah, you know what that's like, don't you, Rosie? You've got people you've got shared experience with, and no one else knew what it was like. And it's not because you want to exclude anyone. It's just that to understand it, you had to be there.
Yes, you don't need words or language.
Mm.
It's a bond that is there and for life. And also, I mean, you know, from laughter to tears, as a woman as well, presumably you could offer comfort, shoulder to weep on, whether it was actually one of the blokes, I'm sure wouldn't have done, but also this next picture of some lovely innocent civilian caught up in it all. And oh, it, you know, brings tears to the eyes looking at that picture. And it makes me think, you know, I know as a friend how perceptive you are, Rose, in other people's sensitivities and when they're in trouble, etc. But how did you deal with comforting these women? What can you tell them?
It's really hard sometimes because, you know, I feel like sobbing too. You know, the depth of emotion of what these people through on a daily basis. This lady lives with the sound of artillery day in, day out. She's only about 10 kilometers from the front line. And she came rushing out and kissing us, saying to me, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing. You've no idea how much it means to us all to know that you're here, to know that you care. And I think that's partly the value of it, is that I represent, not me personally, but I represent the fact that people outside Ukraine care for them and want to help. And it's so important for their morale, because otherwise they would feel alone.
Yes. No, you are a kindly ambassador, which much hope, because, you know, politically they either don't know because they can't get communications, I suppose, or maybe UK isn't seen to be helping sufficiently. It's just enough to sort of, you know, keep it going, but not sufficient. I mean, not in the face of Putin's new weapons it is using.
Yeah.
But where other than knowing that our support is there from people like you, where do you think the Ukrainians, when we're talking about this remarkable sort of fighting back to save themselves, where does it come from, this strength? Is it, do they look to their religion at all?
I think they do, but that's more the older generation. I think that's something that seems to be happening throughout the West, is that the church, they say, is more for the older. I think this belief that they are Ukrainians, you know, I've met quite a few older people who will say things to me like, of course the Ukrainians are Russian. You know, they were Russian not that long ago, so, you know, why should we help them? And it's impossible to describe this sensation of national unity. Everywhere you go, graffiti, flags, people wearing the brooches in yellow and blue. Everywhere you go is the constant reminder of how proud they are, and the respect they have for their country, and for the fact that they do not want to be Russian. And maybe some of the population speak Russian as their native tongue, But people in Wales speak Welsh as their national tongue.
Yes.
Doesn't
Yeah.
part of Britain.
Same as Kazakhstan.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not an indicator that they want to be Russian if they speak Russian. So the sense of national identity is the strongest I've ever met anywhere. And perhaps that is the only gift that Putin has given them, is that if there was anybody who didn't care before, they certainly care now.
Yes, it's well and truly put them on the map. And of course, their own integrity and value that they put on family life. And this was rather deliciously came across when we were talking. And I had said to you, hey, Rose, what's with the eyelashes? Because you definitely had an impressive new set of eyelashes on. And do share with our viewers the background to that, because it was very interesting what you told me about the Ukrainian women.
Well, everywhere in Ukraine you go that's not on the front line, there are many, many more women around than there are men. And Ukrainian women are beautifully turned out. They dress in the latest fashions. They wear the most beautiful makeup. I should say a large proportion of them have beautiful eyelashes. And you see them out in the cafes and socializing together, and they always look beautiful. And I wondered about this at first, and I understand from them that it's their way of showing defiance and saying that we will not be beaten just because we're being bombed and, every night doesn't mean that we are not going to stand up. And it's a kind of signifier of the fact that they will not browbeaten into submission. And so it seems so normal. I thought I'd do it too.
I think that's such a wonderful story that illustrates in a very happy way that inner strength, whatever it takes. And you know that I mirrored back, well, between you and me and anyone listening, that my thing that I do in the same way before every expedition, even if it's solo on top of the world where no one's going to see me, I have my eyelashes tinted. I wouldn't dream of going with that. And it's for me. It sort of reinstates my inner strength. Good heavens, Rose, I had a few more questions, and we've overrun in time already, and lots of people asking questions, but we must put up this slide about Mission Ukraine, because I want people to know where to find Mission Ukraine in case they're interested in helping. And Rose, you could probably explain this better. I think just to go to the website and navigate.
Absolutely, go to the website, navigate. The front page should take you to any links that you might need. We welcome you to join us as volunteers. If you'd like to raise some money yourself and drive a car or a boat out to Ukraine, we'd love to see you. If you'd like to make a contribution, please do. Anything you can do to help us, we'd be very grateful. And we also do campaigns. So currently we're trying to persuade the Home Office to release immigrant boats to us so that we can repurpose them for the guys in Ukraine to rescue people.
Oh, Rose, this is magnificent. And I had a wonderful eulogy for the end to say to you, but we've run out of time. But what I would say is that maybe in several months' time, maybe even come back for a little short update on where you've got to, because now everyone will be really, really curious to know how things are progressing. And some of us, I like to think, will have supported you in this too. And for those of you who are still left watching, because I'm going to say goodbye now and thank you to Rose, let's end the show with Ben. If you can skip to that wonderful Des video because it sums it all up. Rose,
Oh, thank you.
Ooh. Time to say goodbye to Des. I've become really fond of this car. We've been through a lot together. We've been over to Kramatorsk, down to Kherson a few times, across to deliver tackmail. This is a really terrible piece of road. He's seen me through artillery, a close call with incoming, and here we still are. Now he's off to save lives. So what a great car.
you're a heroine, Rose. On behalf of us all, 1,000 thank yous and safe passage for when you go back at the end of next week.
Thank you, sweetie. It was so lovely to talk to you.
God bless.
You too.
Bye.